Hi everyone, it's Gemma here. I'm just hanging out today, so it seemed like as good a day as any to make a video on this topic that I've been wanting to cover on this channel for quite some time, and that is the topic of mental health stigma, the inclusion of people with mental health issues in the community, and our rights and responsibilities. So I do ask that if you find anything of value in this video that you share it with somebody that it may help. I want to make this an informational video as much as possible, so I don't really even care if you like, comment, subscribe, any of that stuff. Just please do share it if you think that it might help someone. And if you are not in a space to watch a video about things like mental health issues and the effects of stigma and prejudice and discrimination and maybe suicide, which I may cover in this video, I may touch on it briefly in any case, then please keep yourself safe and don't watch this video. So I will put a trigger warning in the description. And it's all well and good to want to learn something potentially and to just hear what Gemma has to say, but safety comes first. So absolutely put this video to the side to maybe watch at a later date when you do feel safer, but I'll get straight into it. So mental illness is something that affects an estimated 1 in 4 people in the general population, and it can cover anything from depression and anxiety to your more complex mental health issues such as your psychotic disorders such as schizophrenia, and your mood disorders such as bipolar disorder and schizoaffective disorder, to your personality disorders such as borderline personality disorder, which they now sometimes call emotionally unstable personality type, and that actually accounts for a really high percentage of people accessing mental health services. So I think a lot of people don't realize that the percentage is that high. It's actually 25% of all people. So it's a really high ratio. It's not some small number. I think a lot of people think that it is just like 1 or 2%. There's actually an estimated 1 or 2% of people with bipolar disorder alone. And even that, when you think about it, is not that small of a number. That's 1 in every 100 people. Pardon me. So this is really something that touches a lot of people. If you yourself do not have a mental health issue, then someone in your family does, somebody in your friendship circle does, someone in your community, whether that's your wider community of people that you just see at the shops and whatnot, or people in your smaller close-knit communities of your hobby and interest and sporting groups and things like that, or your spiritual community, which is what I want to make the subject focus of this video, because needless to say, with this high of a proportion in the general population, I suspect that it is really high in our spiritual communities as well. I don't know or have the data to say whether people from various different spiritual groups have a higher or lower proportion of people with mental illnesses in those groups. I don't have that data to say whether those demographics are higher or lower, but needless to say, they exist. I suspect that it's generally across the board. I do think that you get people with mental illnesses from all walks of life. So even in the New Age spiritual communities and in the pagan community, then needless to say, people with mental illness exist. We are here. We are not necessarily going anywhere anytime soon. And so I want to address the stigma that I see people with mental illness facing in our communities, and the fact that a lot of people seem to want to silence us, ridicule us, sweep us under the rug and sweep this issue under the rug and pretend that it doesn't exist, and to actually decrease awareness, which I'm very much against, because I think that it is harmful and damaging on so many levels. We want to actually increase awareness of this issue and look at it for what it is, take it seriously, be real about it and what it means for our communities, and to look at ways that we can safely and effectively and harmoniously include people with mental health issues in our community, because they are here, they are a part of our community, and they are people just like anyone else. So I want to define stigma for you. Stigma, as I define it in this video, is the assertion or the belief that a certain state or condition, in this case mental illness, makes a person less worthy, that it makes a person inherently bad, and that it makes them less deserving of, rights, full citizenship, a place in society and in certain spaces in society, and in a lot of cases less deserving of even basic dignity and respect and fair treatment and humane treatment in some cases. So you do see cases where people with mental illness are, pardon me, sometimes abused. And there's this misconception that people with mental illness, one form of stigma is this persistent myth that people with mental illness are dangerous and that they pose a risk to people in society, and that they, are all criminals and they should all be locked up and they should not be allowed to run around in society. And I think that this is perpetuated to a point by media coverage. I think that sometimes in cases where people with mental illness do commit violent crimes, and I'm not saying that it never happens, I'm not saying that by any means, but I'm saying that when it does happen, the media seems to latch onto it and to really hyper focus on it, and then as a result it filters down and other people in society focus on it, and they take on this idea that these people with these illnesses are dangerous and bad, and that they are not worthy of a place in society, and that they should be marginalized and kept in a box, essentially like a little place in society in their homes, or prison or what have you, or hospital, where they can be kept safe. And this is something that the consumer movement has been pushing back against for years, and the carer movement as well, because if you have a family member or a close friend with a mental illness, you know who they are, you know that they're not necessarily dangerous, and you want them home with you. You want to be able to care for them yourself. So there's this persistent myth that people with mental illness are dangerous, when in actual fact, if you look at the statistics, then the vast majority of people committing violent acts and serious violent crimes are not people with mental illness necessarily at all, but the vast majority of them are people with no mental health diagnosis at all, who have never seen the inside of a mental hospital or so much as a psychiatrist's office ever. So they're just supposedly normal people who are committing these violent crimes, but it's when people with mental illness that commit these crimes that it's focused on in the media and in social circles where people talk about it and things like that, when in actual fact a person with a mental illness is more likely to pose a risk of harm to themselves and to pose a danger to themselves, either through reckless and careless acts and dangerous acts that affect only them, or lack of self-care and things like that, or they're actually more likely to be a victim of abuse. So that's something that doesn't get talked about anywhere near often enough, because people with mental illnesses are actually really vulnerable and susceptible to being victims of abuse, and stigma is something that contributes to this occurrence. And that is one of the reasons why I feel so strongly about speaking out against it and breaking stigma down. So, a couple of other forms of stigma that you may have heard or come across would be things like people saying, oh, it's a choice, people choose to be mentally ill. People with depression are just really negative, they're really miserable and weak, and it's a personality flaw, and they could just get up and get better if they wanted to, which is really false. It's like saying to somebody with a broken leg, oh, you can just get up and walk, it's fine, just get up and walk. Like, without needing any kind of time to heal, having the bones set, having proper pain relief and medication and medical care, and even just a bit of understanding of the fact that this person has a broken leg. When you have depression, you have on some level your mind, spirit, soul, heart are hurting, and you need a bit of understanding. Sometimes you need time, you need the right treatment, which is not accessible to everybody, and there's this whole these issues of privilege that come into it, with the fact that not everybody can find a good therapist, not everybody can afford to see a good therapist. Good treatment is not accessible and available to everybody. So we need to realize that, and especially when we have people in our communities participating in groups, circles, meditation groups, anything like that, that people can have a range of, they can be in a range of different stages in their recovery, and they may or may not be able to actually access services. So to say to them, oh, you just need to go and see a therapist, is not necessarily helpful. So there's that. And those are just two examples of stigma. So stigma can really hurt. It can have far-ranging effects. It promotes things like prejudice and discrimination. So not only could you be discriminated against and excluded from, a social group or a family gathering or a hobby group or interest group or your spiritual community, you could actually miss out on employment opportunities when in actual fact a lot of people with mental illness are perfectly capable of holding down jobs in a lot of cases. Having an episode of mental illness can be disruptive and it can stop you from coming to work sometimes, but for the most part, people with mental illness are perfectly capable of holding down jobs. And so I really think that it's important to break down stigma, and the way that we do this is by educating ourselves, is by arming ourselves with information and making sure that we know the truth about mental illness and that we've got the facts, okay? Because people with mental illness are just people. We are just people in society trying our best. And really, life is hard for everybody. Show me one person who's never had a day of any kind of mental illness in their life, okay? Everybody goes through things like relationship breakups, grief, losing their job, loss, hard experiences that can impact a person's ability to cope. And a lot of the time when somebody suffers from mental illness, they've just had a really severe series of hard knocks in their life. Like, people with mental illness are often victims of trauma and abuse. You can have mental illness from being abused as a child growing up in any way, mental, emotional, physical, sexual. Abuse can affect a person's mental illness. You can get mental illness and PTSD and things like that from coming back from being a war veteran, so coming back from the war, okay, from being a rape survivor and having just a serious trauma like that. And the link between trauma and abuse and mental illness is very much there. A lot of people want to emphasize the link between, the biological basis of mental illness, and there are definite genetic markers that are linked to higher incidences of mental illness, and I am not disputing that in the least in this video. But what I want people to understand is that a lot of the time these genetic predispositions and genetic markers are triggered by life experiences. So stressful life experiences, traumatic life experiences are what cause mental illness to a large extent. And I think a lot of people don't understand that, and that's where a lot of the stigma and prejudice and discrimination comes from. It comes from not only not understanding that people are not necessarily going to be violent, that they are not inherently bad or weak or negative or lazy people who are choosing to be that way, but that they've actually gone through some really hard stuff in a lot of cases. And I just really want to emphasize that in this video. And so part of getting real about mental illness and what it's really about is about looking at what mental illness really is and what effects it really does have. And that's really important when we're looking at the inclusion of people in our community, because we need to get past this myth and this perception, this preconceived notion that we have of people as violent and dangerous and stupid and bad and lazy, right? To get to what the truth is and how this really can affect people's lives. And so when you look at someone with schizophrenia and you put aside this notion that you have from all the news stories that you've seen of someone with schizophrenia being a murderer or a mass murderer, even like a mass shooter, and looking at what the average person with schizophrenia is really like, you'll quite often see people who, maybe they sometimes think that they can hear the government or aliens and messages from, the government and aliens or the Illuminati or something weird like that, talking to them through the radio and stuff like that, which is weird. And often they can get really distressed by it, and it can affect their functioning and impair their ability to care for themselves. And these things are a problem, especially when we're looking at wanting to include people in our community. But and in a lot of cases, these people can still be included in the community, but they just need a little help and support from either family members or, you know, friends, community members, carers, either, you know, those natural supports that they have in the community, or professional agencies that have to come in and help care for these people. So, you know, it is a really serious illness and it does really affect people's lives, but not in the way that you might think. So when we talk about people's inclusion in the community, we can talk about our role as a community and the things that we can do, but then I think we also need to talk about the rights and responsibilities of the people with mental illnesses themselves. So what we can do as communities is that we can be welcoming and inclusive. However, we do still need to have rules and regulations. We absolutely have a right to have boundaries that we expect to be respected, and we still have codes of conduct. And part of the rights and responsibilities for people in the community is that they have a right to be included, but that also comes with the responsibility of following codes of conduct and behavior, following rules and regulations, and respecting boundaries. These things are really important. Participation and inclusion in the community is not unconditional. It absolutely has the conditions of following those rules and respecting those boundaries and all of those things. So that's really important. And I think for a lot of people in the community who want to include people with mental illness in the community, it can be scary for a few reasons. Like, it can seem like this really hard, scary thing that we're not qualified for because, you know, invariably a lot of us don't have professional counselling qualifications or anything like that. And what I want to say about that is that not everybody is a professional therapist or counsellor, and you're not expected to be. We don't have to be professional therapists or counsellors to be able to, you know, be friends with someone with a mental illness, right? And just include them in our community and have them as a part of our lives. And we're not expected to be therapists. So what we can do is we can all be friends. If you can be a caring and compassionate person, and if you can care about someone, then you are qualified. There are also things like suicide responsiveness courses that you can do, in a lot of cases for free. Some of these are offered online, things like Safe Talk and Assist and other ones like that. If you know of any others, then please comment below. But these are suicide responsiveness courses that you can do to learn how to respond to a person in your community who may be having thoughts of self-harm or suicide, and how to appropriately respond to those you know, red flags that people may be displaying. And you don't have to be a professional in order to do those courses, that you can do them for free. And if you are in a space of being able to care for someone and check in with someone and maybe say to them in a respectful way, you know, how are things going? You know, how are you traveling? Are you okay? Have you been taking your medication lately? Like, what kind of space are you in? And I think sometimes we can be afraid to have that conversation, but what I want to say is that if you do it respectfully, it absolutely can, you know, come across as really compassionate and caring, and the person can really appreciate it. And really, nobody expects you to be their counselor or therapist. If someone is in a space of expecting, you know, someone in their spiritual community to be their therapist, then they're either really unwell or a bit simple, frankly, because, you know, as someone with a mental illness, you don't go around expecting everybody to be your therapist. Like, we do understand that that's not how it works, and we don't expect that from the spiritual community. So I think that there are ways to safely and effectively and harmoniously include people with mental illness in the community. It doesn't need to be this thing that we are afraid of and that seems like a really scary thing. There can be potential problems involved with it. I'm absolutely not saying that there's not. And I was having a really great conversation with Avalon, and I always really appreciate the time that Avalon takes to talk to me. But Avalon obviously has facilitated, you know, group rituals in the wider community and things of that nature. So she's got a lot of experience in doing that. And so what she has experienced is that sometimes people with a mental illness can be a drain on their spiritual community just because they're not accessing the services that they need to be, that they're not doing things like practicing self-care, and they're not respecting boundaries and being willing to follow rules, that they are a little bit hiding behind their diagnosis and using it as an excuse for unacceptable behavior. And that is absolutely not acceptable. We can't be doing that. As people with mental illnesses, if we want to be included in the community, then we absolutely need to respect boundaries and behave appropriately and respect rules and regulations in our spiritual communities. And a really good thing to have in place is to have these rules and regulations and boundaries really clearly defined, have them written out, make sure that everybody knows them, and this is a really important step. So I think that I've covered everything that I want to say in this video. The only thing that I really want to say is that it troubles me to see examples of stigma in the YouTube community. I've seen it in the tarot and oracle community and the pagan community and different various segments of the YouTube spiritual community, and that really troubles me because we have got a lot of really amazing people in the community who have been open about their mental health issues on their channels, who are putting out fantastic content that's beneficial not only to the spiritual community but to the mental health recovery community, and most importantly the place where those two things overlap, right? People who are interested in spirituality who also have a mental illness, and that includes me. So I haven't spoken a whole lot on my channel about my mental health issues, especially in proportion to how much they actually affect my day-to-day life. Like, I've spoken about it very little on this channel. I tend to come on and try to keep things positive and just talk about my tarot and oracle cards and my witch stuff and stuff that puts me in a good mood and makes me happy, and put those good vibes out there because it feels good to do that, and that's a part of recovery, right? But it is a part of my life. I am someone who has been diagnosed with a major mental illness, and I live with it every day. And so to see people making negative comments on YouTube, such as, someone posts a video where they've physically assaulted someone else and people comment on it saying, oh, what a violent person, they must be bipolar. Do you have any idea how that feels for someone who lives with the diagnosis of bipolar, who fights every day for their recovery and their wellness, who goes to extraordinary lengths to be well and to be a productive and valuable person in society, to see that kind of stigma? Like, it is not fair on everyone with bipolar to tar them all with that brush that we are all violent. That is just completely unfair, and it makes people not want to be a part of this community. It makes people want to stop making videos. And Katie Flowers has been open about the fact that that incident made her not want to make videos anymore, and that upsets me. That really troubles me because I would hate to lose Katie Flowers and everything that she adds to this community on YouTube. And I just ask you to think about that. I'm trying to make this an informational video and not a video where I'm telling people off, which is actually what I want to do. I want to waggle the finger at some people, but don't do that. Lots of valuable people in this community. Kellyanne Maddox has been open about having mental health issues and struggles with self-harm and things of that nature on her channel. I would hate to lose her because she's sick of the stigma. Jessie Huntenberg has been open about having depression, and I think that it's great that she's open about that because she shows that you can have depression and, move past it, and that even with depression you can do all the things. You can be a mom and a tarot reader and have a daily spiritual practice and put awesome content out there on YouTube and other formats and platforms, and the thing that really was the straw that broke the camel's back, that really got to me, was that I was watching Thorn Mooney last night, and she mentioned that she made a video about productivity, and she got a lot of comments on that video saying that she was being too negative and that she shouldn't be talking about her mental health issues and her struggles with drinking and depression and this and that on her channel, and that somebody who's had depression has no business telling anybody how to do anything. And that is just wrong, for starters. And that really pisses me off, because do you have any idea how lucky we are to have Thorn Mooney in this community? She is an academic who has studied religion, and she is open about her struggles with mental health issues, including depression and borderline personality disorder, which is no small thing to deal with. And she's been open about the fact that she needs therapy on a semi-ongoing basis, like from time to time. And it's the same with me. From time to time in my life, I have to go back to a therapist and get help to move forward in my life and to learn how to cope, like remember how to cope with things again. That's kind of the reality of having BPD. And she has, finished college. She has got a job. She holds down a job. Plus, she writes books. She contributes everything that she contributes to this community with her blog posts and her YouTube videos. People who criticize her for being open about her mental illness, frankly, just need to take a seat. You have got no business telling her what she can and can't talk about on YouTube. And when someone like Thorn, who has achieved all this fantastic stuff, is open about having mental illness, do you know what that does for someone who lives with mental illness? A big part of what that does is it gives us hope. It gives us hope that you can have a mental illness and live with a mental illness and deal with it, and not only have an awesome life, but do awesome things. So seriously, take a seat, shut up, let Thorn talk, and be open about her struggles with mental illness, and keep doing her thing. And that's really all I ask. And, stigma is just so harmful and damaging. I really want to emphasize that, and the fact that there's no need for it. We can educate ourselves. We can find out the truth about mental illness and what it really means. It doesn't just mean that somebody's negative. We don't have to be up and have good vibes all the time. And yeah. One last thing that I want to say in this video is that with all of this talk about inclusion in the community, as people with mental illness ourselves, we really do need to explore whether it is the right time and place for us to be included in the community at this time, what segments of the community we want to be included in, and why and how, and just whether or not we're in that space, because sometimes you're not. There is absolutely a time and a place for recovery and to kind of retreat from the wider community, and it's never healthy to completely isolate yourself, but sometimes you do need to go within and have a little bit of that alone time, whether it's because you're really unwell or because you're just feeling a little bit fragile and a bit sensitive. Maybe it's better to just hang out with your close family and friends who know you and who are really understanding. Maybe you're going to therapy regularly and you need to focus on that, and seeing your doctor or counselor or whoever it is that you see, and just focusing on that. There absolutely is a time and a place for hanging out in recovery spaces and peer spaces, but having said that, there's also a time and a place for moving out of recovery and peer space and being a part of the wider community. And so you want to really look at the spiritual community that you want to be a part of, whether the people are cool, whether they are actually people that you want to hang out with, that you're going to get some benefit from being a part of this spiritual community and participating, and what you have to give, whether you have the time and the energy and the inclination to give to this community of yourself, your time, your energy, all of that. And just, who these people are, whether you actually want to hang out with them, because sometimes you don't. We can stigmatize people with a mental illness, but sometimes even people who don't have any kind of diagnosis are just not cool people that you want to hang out with. So really look at your communities and whether or not you want to be a part of them. I know for a fact that there are some people who comment on spiritual people's YouTube videos that say stigmatizing things that I would definitely not want to hang out with. So just consider that. So that's the final point that I wanted to say. I really want to end this on a positive note and say that I think this is really important. I've gotten a little bit ranty at a couple of points in this video. I'm aware of that. I think that just demonstrates how strongly I feel about this issue, and that, I think that people with a mental illness actually have something positive to bring to this community. As I said, there are people in this community who are not only interested in spirituality, but who are also living with mental illness and recovering. you know, in whatever way, and they can share that knowledge with other people in the community who are also recovering. You know, I'm studying mental health peer work and being a peer, and it's really highlighted for me how important it is to be peers and to connect with your peers who maybe have similar interests to you and who also struggle with similar things that you struggle with. And that is just so valuable and so important. And, you know, people with mental illness are here. We are a part of this community, just to reiterate, and we're not necessarily bad people, and there's not only a few of us. There are a lot of us, 1 in 4 in the general community. That's a lot. So I do thank you very, very much for watching this video. If you have watched it to the end, please comment below if you have anything to add, if you think that anything that I've said or any of the information that I've put forward is incorrect. Please feel free, just do it in a respectful way. And thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time on my channel. Bye!